You may be seated. On behalf of the family of Nestor Ratesh, I want to express appreciation for everyone who is here joining us, both here in the room and those who are joining us via live stream from around the world. I think it's only appropriate that his funeral should be broadcast around the world, given that so much of his work was involved with broadcasting around the world as part of Radio Free Europe. It is this is a loss that in certain ways we have known, we have felt coming over the difficult years and the toll that Alzheimer's takes on a life. But it is also something that is fresh and raw and painful still at the same time. And at a time such as these, our tradition teaches us to look to the book of Psalms to help us find the words that we don't know when we don't know what to say. From Psalm 103. Rachem av al banim, rachem Adonai al yire'av, ki hu yada yitzrenu, zachor ki afar anachnu, enosh ke chatzir yamav, ketzitz hatzadeh ken yatzitz, ki ruach avrabo ve'enenu, v'lo yakirenu od mikomo, v'chesed Adonai me'olam ve'ad olam al yire'av, v'tzidkato livnei vanim. As a parent has compassion for one's children, so Adonai has compassion for those who show reverence. God knows how we are fashioned and remembers that we are but dust. The days of mortals are like grass. We flourish as the flowers in the field. A wind passes over us and we are no more, and no one can recognize where we grew. But Adonai's compassion is everlasting. God's kindness to children's children, to the reverent ones, endures age after age, unchanging. As the cantor to come to chant from, sing Psalm 23.
Mismol David, Adonai, Adonai roi lo echsar, binot asher yarbitzeni, al me menuchot yenahaleni. Nafshi yishover, nafshi yishover, yanchini v'magle tzedek l'man shemo. Gam ki elech begeit al mavet, lo irara ki ata imadi, shivtecha Shantecha, Shivtecha, Umishantecha, Hema Yenachamuni, Tarach Lefanai Shulchan, Neged Zorerai, Tishanta שמן ראשי כוסי רוויה אך טוב החסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי ושבתי בבית אדוני ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך
A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me to lie down in green pastures and leads me beside the still waters. God restores my soul and guides me in straight paths for God's name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, and life is a journey, a going, a growing, from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage made stage by stage to life everlasting. To help us understand the stages of those lives and the journey, I want to invite those who knew him best to be able to share some words. First, his daughter Gabby.
Dear friends and family, we are here today to remember a wonderful, talented man who was known as Nestor Ratesh Washington to the world, but to me, he was my dad, and I was his little girl. Fetit Sameach, he would say, often to me and to his wonderful caregivers near the end. He was a very intelligent, caring, and giving man who never lost his core giving nature. He was born in 1933 in a small Jewish shtetl called Moinesht. When he was 8 years old, all the Jews in his village were deported to the capital of the province, Bakou, as part of Hitler's final solution. Fortunately, the Russians invaded in August 1944 and liberated that part of Romania, So that was as far as Hitler got with my dad and his family. He was raised by his aunt and uncle after the early, unfortunate death of his father. He always said he had 3 mothers and fathers, as he always knew his biological mother and was doted on by his aunts and uncles as the only child. As he grew, he became a Marxist Zionist as part of the youth movement HaShomer HaTzair. His parents thwarted his plans to make Aliyah, move to Israel at the age of 15, but he left home anyway to attend a technical high school to become a hydroelectrical engineer. Working on construction sites did not suit him, though, as he got tuberculosis at the age of 19 and had to consider other careers. He started at the University of Bucharest at the age of 20 and met my mother, Hansi, as she's known, on the very first day of class. They married while still students in university, a marriage that lasted 67 years. My father was quite ambitious and felt strongly that since he was a Jew, he had to be the best in order to overcome the ubiquitous discrimination that Jews faced. His prior Marxist knowledge served him well in the newly communist Romanian university, and he graduated first in his class with degrees in philosophy and journalism. His first big job as a reporter was as a reporter for the Romanian press agency, Agea Press. In this capacity, he would get news stories from the Associated Press and Reuters, and then redact the news so they are acceptable for Romanian press outlets. Life was hard in Bucharest in the 1960s. My parents lived in one room of what we would call a 3-bedroom apartment. The bathroom and kitchen were shared by 3 families. In this one room were my mother and father, and then I was born, and my grandmother moved in to care for me while my mother worked as a librarian at the Central National Library. No wonder I'm an only child. My parents, fueled by my dad's ambition and drive to create a better life, started thinking about emigrating in the late 1960s. In 1972, they submitted papers asking to emigrate to the state of Israel. Because of this intent, my father lost his job with the state press agency, and he became the right-hand man to Rabbi Rosen, the chief rabbi of Romania. In that capacity, he met many influential American Jews who visited Jewish communities behind the Iron Curtain. As fate had it, he met and befriended Marty and Connie Camero, who ended up sponsoring us to the United States and becoming our family here. Leaving everything you know and everything you have and all your friends and family is not an easy task. But my dad was confident that there was a better life waiting for us here, and indeed, he was right. He was able to become the US political correspondent of Radio Free Europe for 20 years, broadcasting daily, uncensored news to Romania. He interviewed influential people here in the States, Romanian dignitaries such as the exiled King of Romania, and Romanian officials that defected to the United States. He became the Walter Cronkite of Romania. Throughout his storied career, Dad never forgot those who were left behind in Romania. Using his influence, he was able to press the Romanian government to allow previously denied families to realize their dreams of emigrating to the West. Several have reached out as his death has become public to share how grateful they are. The events of 1989 excited many of us. Finally, Romania was rid of Ceausescu, and we could consider visiting Romania without fear of being detained. My father wrote his first book in English about those events, titled Romania, the Entangled Revolution, which was published in 1991 and is still used by US universities as a textbook in their Eastern European history classes. The capstone to my dad's career, however, was becoming the director of the Romanian service in Munich and Prague in 1989, and again between 1994 and 2003 when he retired at the age of 70. My dad thrived on the challenges of running the whole service, and he still also wrote and broadcast on the radio. The drawback to me was that it kept him far away from the rest of the family much of the time. My personal memories as a child are that my dad was warm and encouraging and helped me with my math homework. He liked it when I did his hair in little ponytails. But he was busy working a lot of the time. Once in the States, he was the family patriarch, doing kiddush on Friday nights or leading the family seder for many years. For him, Jewish holidays were sacred family time, and all his prayers were in Hebrew. No compromises with English. Our relationship shifted to a loving bond among adults after his Alzheimer's diagnosis in 2008, as I made more of an effort to spend one-on-one time with him. I was fortunate to have 17 years of trips with my dad, walks with my dad, and talks, and towards the end, songs with my dad. We were at our best walking and talking. He would tell me stories of his youth and stories of his career. One of his favorites was when he was interviewing Ion Pacepa, the former director of the Securitate, the Romanian KGB. After his defection to the US, my dad asked him why the dictator of Romania did not want to kill him, as he had ordered the assassination by irradiation of 3 prior directors of Radio Free Europe. Pacepa's answer was, Ceausescu was afraid of the influential Jews my dad knew in the US. So my dad would say, ironically, I was saved because I was a Jew. Who would have guessed that? My dad was very philosophical and optimistic. And as I spent more time with him, I realized that we had many personality characters in common. We thought in very similar patterns, and we unconsciously did the same things. For example, humming under our breath when we were walking down the hall together, holding hands. His optimism came through even stronger as his memory lapsed. When asked, how are you? His answer was, almost always, I'm good, as that was his default. He couldn't remember anything bad, so he was good. As his world got smaller, his interests became simpler. He loved music and enjoyed many concerts with my mother. He loved to eat and was very appreciative of good food. He would be very concerned that his caregiver was not eating when he was given a meal. He was very polite with his wonderful caregivers and so very giving. He would always want to share his food so everyone had some. He always tried his best in physical therapy and tried to do what was asked of him with a cheerful disposition. He never lost his positivity and sense of humor, even as he lost everything else. In one of his early speeches that I found while going through his papers, he said, for us, the end is always a start. The dusk identifies with the dawn. Well, the sun has set on my dad's life, but we shall never forget his shining spirit.
Clearly, his gift for words were another thing that you shared in common. Thank you. Now for his grandchildren, Becky and Ethan.
Nestor Ratesh, Nelu, or as I knew him, Zeta, was my grandfather. For most of my life, he spent the majority of his time living abroad, so our time together was limited to a few weeks around the high holidays and Passover. I have fond memories growing up of playing chess with him and sitting next to him at Seders, and remember the holidays being extra special because it meant he would be home. In the last 8 years or so, as his Alzheimer's progressed, I had the privilege to spend more time with Zeta. I would spend a week or a weekend every summer with Zeta while Hansi traveled. I love that I could be there because this is when I really got to know him as a person. I heard stories about growing up in the little village of Anatevka, Moinesht. I heard about his youth group experiences at Hashomer HaTzair, and I heard about his life as a journalist and how dangerous it was, and even how his predecessors were all assassinated, yet he stayed safe and alive because he was Jewish. Ironic, right? He was happy to come along on whatever field trips or errands I had planned for the day, especially if it included coffee and chocolate. We would go out to eat sushi, walk at Brookside Gardens, or visit my apartment to take care of the kittens. One time, he even came along with me to go to a trapeze class. He had a great time watching and asked when was he going to get a turn on the flying trapeze. I jokingly told him that he was over the age limit. Throughout our time, he would ask me a list of questions. Typically, they repeated, so I was able to learn the answers in Romanian, which he always appreciated. He would ask, "What's my job?" "A teacher." "Wow, very respectable." "Was I making good money?" "Was I happy?" "How old was I?" "When was I going to get married?" At one point, my mom made a comment that maybe I wouldn't marry a man. Maybe it would be a woman. His response, "Will she be Jewish?" "Okay, that's fine, as long as you're happy." That's just how he was, always concerned that I was happy and had all I needed. Zeta and I connected through music. We sang so many songs together. We started singing Eli Eli together back before I was in high school, and we continued it every time he was home. Sometimes, when I stayed with him, I got tired of singing Hatikva on repeat, but I kept singing because music and singing always seemed to keep his spirits up. Even when he wasn't feeling well or having a tough time, music and singing with him was always the thing that helped the most. In the evenings, we would watch and listen to Aida and many of Beethoven's symphonies. Just a few weeks ago, I played Aida for him in the hospital, and he started humming along with it. I know he heard us singing Fiddler on the Roof to him this past Thursday. When I stayed with him, he would wake up humming the same songs we listened to the night before. He would be in a great mood and was happy and pleasantly surprised to see me there staying with him, since he would forget that I slept over. It was a new experience every morning, and he was delighted. I would make him breakfast, and he would say, "For me? My granddaughter is cooking for me?" I think he thought I was much younger than I really was, so he was extra impressed that I was able to figure out how to make oatmeal or use the stove. I am so thankful that Zeta got to meet his great-granddaughter, Gemma. They were born almost exactly 90 years apart. It was so amazing to see the understanding in his eyes when he put his hand on my belly and felt her move, or when he held her tiny newborn foot in his hand. Every time I brought her to visit him, he was more engaged and more awake when she was there, just watching her play. Gigi will grow up remembering him by hearing his stories and seeing his pictures, several of which she is in, and actually, she just began saying Zeta the very evening he passed away. Despite everything, Zeta always kept his positive outlook and gregarious personality. He coped, at least with me, with hardships by joking, and he often used comparison to point out that things really are not that bad. When I was with him and he had a pain or he read a disturbing newspaper headline, he would say something along the lines of, "It's okay, I lived through the Holocaust, I survived tuberculosis, and I wasn't even assassinated. I will survive this too." And he did. May his memory always be a blessing.
Are you the Nestor Ratesh? On our family trip to Romania in 2004, I distinctly remember meeting many people who were simply honored to be able to meet my grandfather, and who talked about how his voice had filled their homes from the time he started his post as Washington correspondent for Radio Free Europe in 1973, through his tenure as director of the Romanian service, ending 40 years later. While he was known by his full name, always his full name, throughout Romania, this was actually a pen name that he had adopted as a young man, starting his career in journalism in Romania in an effort to make his name sound less Jewish. Born Natan Stessel, his last name shortly changed to Rothenstein, when he was adopted into his aunt's family after his father passed away. And even the alias of Ratesh was not fixed in time. The H was only added after my family immigrated to the US in 1973 to make the name easier to pronounce in English. And while he had many names throughout his life, he was always my Zeta. My memories of Zeta as a kid are largely centered around the Jewish holidays, including going to Shul at Har Zion for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and leading long, very traditional Passover Seders on Hillsborough Drive. As I got older, Zeta's trips back to Kemp Mill got longer, and I got to spend a bit more time with him. We played chess. I learned more about his childhood in the shtetl of Moinesht, his time in Hashomer Tzair, and his work with the chief rabbi of Romania. When I was on my gap year in Israel and Palestine, he emailed me for my birthday, and I'll read to you what he wrote to me. He said, "I hope you have a wonderful and fruitful stay there and come home safely and full of joy after experiencing the life in a kibbutz. When I was your age, I wanted very much to be a kibbutznik, but there was no way I could make Aliyah during that time. So instead I became, for better or worse, a journalist." Over the years, Alzheimer's reared its head, leading to fewer long stories and more short questions. "What do you do for a living?" I would reply by telling him about whatever my job was at the moment, and he would retort, "Well, that's nice, but why aren't you a journalist?" He would ask, "Are you married?" "Well, no, Zeta, not yet, but you remember Rachel, right? Rachel." Right, of course. Is she Jewish?" Thankfully, my answers generally seemed to be satisfactory, at least until the thought would cross his mind again. As time passed, the role of leading the Passover Seder nominally was still in Zeta's hands, but it became my role to keep us on track, to make sure we were on the right page, to encourage participation from everyone around the table, and to subtly skip a few pages when the attendees started to get hungry. And I would tell Zeta, "Oh, no, don't worry, we already did that part." I was always sitting right there next to Zeta, one hand on his agada and one hand on mine. After Rachel and I bought our house in Wheaton, we became neighbors. And he was able to come to one or two of the family functions that we started hosting. When he got to the house, he would ask, "Where are we? Whose house is this?" And when my mom would tell him, "Hasta este casa Luis Ethan," this is Ethan's house, he would reply with pride, saying, "Wow, this is my grandson's house?" Thankfully, Zeta was able to attend our wedding just a few short years ago. He joined me in saying the motzi at the start of the reception, and for those who were there, you know that he thoroughly enjoyed himself on the dance floor. The last few years were hard, especially for my mom and for Hansi, but thankfully Zeta was well cared for by his amazing team of caregivers, and until recently could still enjoy some of the good things in life. Zichrono lebracha, may his memory be for a blessing.
For someone who had such a journey throughout his life, it seems appropriate that we are on Parshat Lech Lecha, in which God commands Abraham, "Lech lecha ma'artzecha u'moladatcha mibeit avicha al ha'aretz asher areka." Go forth from your land, from your birthplace, from the house of your ancestors to the land that I will show you. Abraham was called to go forth from his homeland on a journey to an unknown place. In the Torah's words, Eretz Asher Areka, a place that God would show. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs quotes Rashi, who says that the words Lech Lecha, go for yourself, should be understood as travel for your own benefit and good. And Rabbi Sachs Zichrono Livracha goes on to say, sometimes we have to give up our past in order to acquire a future. God was already teaching Abraham that what seems like a sacrifice is, in the long run, not so. Abraham was about to say goodbye to the things that mean most to us: our land, our birthplace, our parents' home, the places where we belong. It was a journey from the familiar to the unfamiliar, a leap into the unknown. And as we learn throughout the rest of Abraham's story, it was not a singular, linear journey, but a life of moving, taking him from Ur to Haran to Shechem to Beit El to Egypt to Hebron to Beersheba to Gerar and back to Beersheba. Throughout his life, Nestor Ratesh would hear a similar call, a call to go forth on what would be a fascinating life of journey, from his birthplace in Moineste to go east to Bachau, north to Piatra Niemt, south to Eucharist, then to Israel, and to Washington, D.C., to Munich, back to Bucharest, and Munich and Prague, and back to Bucharest again, and then back to Rockville. Like Abraham, the call to go forth defined the life of Nestor Ratesh. I don't want to repeat all of the stops along the way that we've already heard about, but I will just add in a few details of things that I learned along the way. As we heard, he was born in Moinesti. It was a Jewish shtetl, and a tefka, I'm told, is a good way for us to be able to think about it. But it was really a thriving Jewish community when Nestor was born. It had Jewish day schools, 5 synagogues, many famous rabbis and cultural leaders, scholars, and industrialists all came from there, including, by the way, the chief rabbi for whom he worked. It has also played a very important role in Jewish history, because it was in 1875 that a group of 50 families began planning to migrate from Moineste to Palestine, and they founded the Association of the Yishuv Eretz Yisrael Al Yedei Avodat Adamah, the association for building up communities of people who will work the land in the land of Israel. In August 1882, 22 of those families left and made that journey and founded the colony of Rosh Pinah, today a city in Israel, and that marked the very start of the first Aliyah. In fact, Moineste became legendary, was mentioned in a well-known Yiddish proverb that Nestor liked to repeat: Dorch Moineste kein Eretz Yisrael, that it is through Moineste that one gets to the land of Israel. Of course, the 1930s was a turbulent time to grow up in Europe, and we've heard how they had to leave, deported to the larger city of Bachau, and we're told that it was truly a scene out of Fiddler, with a borrowed wagon and horse taking whatever they could carry with them. They lived with relatives and survived through the help of Rosa's younger sister, who worked for a wealthy family and brought them food that she would sneak out of the house. As we heard, Romania was under German control, but Romania's queen had told the Nazis that she would take care of the Jews in her country. And thankfully, the Germans did not force the deportation from that part of the country to death camps, and they ended up being liberated, as it were, by the Russians. Of course, Nestor's father said, what difference does it make if the Russians beat me up or the Nazis beat me up? But that was part of life as a Jew at that time. And then following the war, Nestor indeed left his familial house, not for Eretz Yisrael as he had wanted, but to attend a boarding school for engineering in Piatra Neamt. As we heard, he went from there to university, and that first day, as we heard, he met Hansi. We didn't hear how he met Hansi, which she shared with us the other day. Was she was on a bus on the way to the opening convocation and asked the bus driver where she should get off. And Nestor jumped up to answer the question for him. And that began a friendship that turned into a relationship that turned into 67 years of marriage across continents. Truly amazing. But of course, it was his work that in so many ways defined his life, working at Agirpress, the AP of Romania, and then when it was time to go forth again after working for the chief rabbi, as was mentioned, some stops in the land of Israel and then Vienna and Rome. Nestor and Hansi and Gavi made it to Washington, D.C. Nestor worked, as I understand, as a translator for the IMF for a little while, spoke frequently about Jewish life in Romania throughout the Jewish community here. And this migration process had been made so much easier by their dear friends, Marty and Connie Camerau, who I understand actually from my mother-in-law this morning texted me to say they were actually very good friends of my wife's aunt, Shalamith and Rabbi Shelley Elster from their time in Virginia. And one of the great gifts that the Cameraus gave them, besides bringing them here, was this incredible team of caregivers that we've been hearing about, from Tina and Amy and Rosalind, who really were just, from everything that I've been told, just truly amazing in their loving care for him. Nestor had grown up in a traditionally observant Jewish home before World War II, but after the war under communism, had to leave behind the outward understandings of observance, and Gabby didn't even know she was Jewish until she came to the States at age 9. But Nestor, as we heard, was always connected to the community, using his positions to help the Jewish community in Romania wherever he could, including when Romania was up for most favored nation status, making sure that the U.S. negotiators had the list of Jews who were trying to emigrate out so they could make that part of the demands of granting that status. Nestor had very strong language skills, fluent in Romanian, Hebrew, Yiddish, and English, passable with French and Russian and German. And together with that strong journalism skills that he honed at the university and working in Romania, it was a natural fit for Radio Free Europe, as we've heard about. And when he went back in the 80s to Romania during the revolution of Nicolae Ceausescu, I got it right, he was the only uncensored media at the time, and as we heard, his voice was known throughout Romania. But I think it wasn't just his voice, but his words that make it clear. And I found a transcript of an interview program that he hosted right after the revolution, where he was having several professors who were going to be speaking about the situation and what lies ahead. And here's the translation that I was able to find of that. We're just about to say goodbye to the old year and the entire decade of the 80s to start a new year and usher in a new countdown, the 90s. But here we are not only witnessing a change in the calendar in these last days of the 80s, a historical destiny has also changed. Who would have said only a week ago that the end of the decade will also mark the end of one of the biggest tragedies of the Romanian people, the nightmares of the Ceausescu era. It did not come naturally and smoothly like the flow of time, but convulsively and violently with a great tribute of blood. This revolution cannot and must not be limited to the ousting of an odious dictator, the removal of bankrupt economic policy orientations and cosmetic improvements in the relationships between the rulers and the ruled. It must be a historic break, a total break with the last 5 decades and a return to the values of democracy and the mechanisms of the market economy, a return to oneself and to the civilized world. We who have lived for many years in democratic countries, who have absorbed not only theoretically the concepts of political, economic, and cultural freedom, feel obliged to stimulate wisdom and knowledge. It is unbelievable that it is only 2 weeks since we announced in this very program the beginning of a cycle of discussions on the fundamental concepts of freedom, various forms and practices of democracy, traditions, and experiments to give the Romanian public. This is no longer placed in a hypothetical future, but is the immediate and urgent reality. And as he introduced the panel, he said, "We do not intend to give lessons to all. We do not intend to indicate a particular course at all. What we want is to give our listeners a broad picture of the options before them, so that when they go to the polls, and we hope they will, they can make an informed choice. So we are not and do not want to be omniscient, and we are not and do not want to be the only possessors of truth and wisdom. In fact, our listeners should know from their parents and grandparents that there was a democratic tradition in Romania." It was a beautiful introduction, a beautiful way to be able to talk about what it means to have an expertise and to be able to share that without imposing it upon others, not to tell people what to do, but to help to open up the possibilities. And from all that I've learned, that seems to really encapsulate much of who he was. His journey certainly made for a fascinating life. And of course, with so much travel, that could also be sometimes a difficult life for those who were not there with him. But what impressed me the most was the way that we have heard Gabi and Becky and Ethan, and I know Joanna as well, talking of the kindness he showed, his optimism, his fun-loving and adventurous spirit. The way he loved to take Gabi and later Becky and Ethan on vacations to Disney World, and especially to go on roller coasters wherever they went, even until his 80s. So it doesn't surprise me that he would have wanted to go trampolising with you. And these final years, as we heard, were difficult on one level and yet also provided certain opportunities to be able to spend some more time together, to be able to spend a quality time together that had not always been so easy when he was traveling. And what a joy that he was able to meet Gigi. Like Abraham, Nestor lived a full and long life, one that was constantly taking him from one place to another. And like Abraham, whenever the opportunity or need to move on came, Nestor was there and ready to say, "Hineni, I am here, I'm ready." As we now prepare to take him on the final leg of this earthly journey, I would like to think that he is already beginning his next research project, interviewing all the people from history who he would have liked to have met, preparing to write a new book to share his insights. So with that in mind, we want to extend our deepest, deepest condolences to all of his family, to his caregivers, his friends, those joining us throughout the world. And we pray that the soul of Nestor Ratesh, Nachman ben Asher Aryeh, will always be for a blessing. In just a moment, the cantor will recite We'll chant the Elmalei Rachamim prayer, memorial prayer, followed by which we will ask for the pallbearers to come forward, and then we will follow behind them to out to the cars. Those who are joining to the cemetery, they'll have a card for you to put in your window and ask you to put on your flashing lights and to join in the procession over to the Park Lawn Cemetery on Veers Mill Road, just a few-minute drive from here. Shiva will be observed at Gabby's house, and that will be following this evening with the service at 7:30 for Minyan, and then tomorrow and Wednesday, welcoming guests throughout the day and evening Minyans at 7:30 each night. Ask that you please rise.
Hail, Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bameromim, Hamitzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, B'malot Kedoshim Utehorim Kezohar Harakia Mazehirim Et Nishmat Nachman ben Asher Aryeh Shehalach leolamo began Eden menuchato Adna ba'al harachamim hastirehu beseter knafecha leolamim V'titzror b'tzror ha'chaim et nishmato Adonai hu nachalato V'yanuchu b'shalom al mishkavah V'nomar
Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Nestor Ratesh Nachman ben Asher Aryeh, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life, and may he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. You may be seated. Ladies and